The Anglo-Nepalese War, also known as the Gurkha War, was fought between the Kingdom of Nepal and the East India Company as a result of border disputes and ambitious expansionism of both the belligerent parties. The war ended with the signing of the Treaty of Sugauli in 1816, which ceded around a third of Nepal's territory to the British. The British were the invading forces, while the Nepalese maintained a defensive position. The British attacked in two successive waves of invasion. It was the most expensive war waged during the governorship of Lord Moira. Historical background. The Shah era of Nepal began with the Gurkha king Prithvi Narayan Shah invading Kathmandu Valley, which consisted of the capital of the Malla Confederacy. Until that time only the Kathmandu Valley was referred to as Nepal. The Confederacy requested the East India Company for help on an ill-equipped and ill-prepared expedition numbering 2,500 was led by Captain Kinloch. In 1767, the expedition was a disaster. The Gurkha army easily overpowered those who had not succumbed to malaria or desertion. This ineffectual British force provided the Gurkha with firearms and filled the Gurkhas with overconfidence, causing them to underestimate their opponents in future wars. Victory and occupation of the Kathmandu Valley by Prithvi Narayan Shah, starting with the Battle of Kirtipur, resulted in the shift of the capital of his kingdom from Gurkha to Kathmandu, and subsequently the empire that he and his descendants built came to be known as Nepal. Also, the invasion of the wealthy Kathmandu Valley provided the Gurkha army with economic support for furthering the martial ambitions throughout the region. The campaign in the eastern region was largely a failure. After a number of defeats to the Limbuwan army, the Gurkha army finally made a peace treaty with Limbuwan and incorporated the Limbuwan states into the kingdom under a mutual pact. In the west, all rulers as far as the Kali River had submitted or been replaced by 1790. Farther west still, the Kumaon kingdom with its capital Almora also lost the war with the Gurkha in 1791 under Bahadur Shah, the second son of Prithvi Narayan Shah. To the north, however, aggressive raids into Tibet triggered Chinese intervention. In 1792 the Qianlong Emperor sent an army, expelling the Nepalese from Tibet to within 5 kilometers of the capital at Kathmandu. Acting Regent Bahadur Shah appealed to the then British Governor-General of India for help. Anxious to avoid confrontation with the Chinese, the Governor-General did not send troops but sent Captain Kirkpatrick as mediator. However, before he arrived, the war with China had finished. The Nepalese were forced into signing a humiliating treaty revoking the trading privileges in Tibet and requiring them to pay tribute to Peking every 5 years. The Tibet affair had postponed a previously planned attack on the Garhwal kingdom, but by 1803 the Raja of Garhwal, Pradyuman Shah, had also been defeated. He was killed in the struggle in January 1804 and all his land annexed. Further west, General Amar Singh Thapar overran lands as far as Kangra, the strongest fort in the hill region, and laid siege to it. However, Maharaja Ranjit Singh, the ruler of the Sikh state in Punjab, intervened and drove the Nepalese army east of the Sutlej River by 1809. Causes. The British were also expanding the sphere of influence at an alarming rate, while the Nepalese had been expanding their empire into Sikkim in the east, Kumaon and Garhwal in the west, and into the British sphere of influence in Awadh, or Oudh as the British called it. In the south, the British East India Company had consolidated its position in India from its main bases of Calcutta, Madras and Bombay. This serious British expansion had already been resisted in India, culminating in 3 Anglo-Maratha wars, as well as in the Punjab, where Ranjit Singh and the Sikh Empire had their own aspirations. Trade, the economic cause, constituted the major cause of conflict with Nepal. The British had made constant efforts to persuade the Nepalese government to allow them their trade to the fabled Tibet through Nepal, despite a series of delegations headed by William Kirkpatrick, Maulvi Abdul Qadir, and later William O. Knox. The Nepalese-The refused to budge an inch. The resistance to open up the country to the Europeans could be summed up in a Nepali precept: with the merchants come the musket, and with the Bible comes the bayonet. Lord Hastings was not averse to exploiting any commercial opportunities that access to the Himalayan region might offer. He knew that these would gratify his employers and silence his critics, because the East India Company was at this time in the throes of a cash flow crisis. It needed substantial funds in Britain in order to pay overheads, pensions, and dividends, but there were problems about remitting the necessary assets from India. Traditionally, the company had bought Indian produce and sold it in London, but this no longer made economic sense. The staple Indian export was cotton goods, and demand for these was declining as home-produced textiles captured the British market. So the company was having to transfer its assets in another, more complicated and expensive way. It was having to ship its Indian textiles to Canton, sell them on the Chinese market, buy tea with the proceeds, then ship the tea for sale in Britain. So when Hastings told the directors of the company about an alternative means of remittance, a rare and precious raw material that could easily and profitably be shipped from India directly to London, they were at once interested. The raw material in question was a superior quality wool, the exquisitely soft and durable animal down that had been used since time immemorial to make the famous wraps or shawls of Kashmir. This down was found only on the shawl wool goat, and the shawl wool goat was found only in certain areas of western Tibet. It refused to breed anywhere else. This all explains why, under the terms of the Treaty of 1816, Nepal was required to surrender its far western provinces. Hastings hoped that this territory, partly annexed by the company and partly restored to its previous rulers, would give British merchants direct access to the wool-growing areas. Similarly, David Ochterlony, then an agent at Ludhiana, on 24 August 1814 noted of Dehradun as a potentially thriving entrepot for trans-Himalayan trade. Quote, he contemplated annexing Garhwal not so much with the view to revenue, but for security of commercial communications with the country where the shawl wool is produced. The British soon got to know the Kumar and provided a better facility for trade with Tibet. Therefore, the annexation of these two areas became part of the strategic objectives. Political safety. While trade was indeed a major objective of the company, out of it grew a concept of political safety, which essentially meant a strategy of dissuasion and larger areas of occupation. The evidence does not support the claim that Hastings invaded Nepal only for commercial reasons. It was a strategic decision. He was wary of the Hindu revival and solidarity among the Marathas, the Sikhs, and the Gurkhas amid the decaying Mughal Empire. He was hatching preemptive schemes of conquest against the Marathas in central India, and he needed to cripple Nepal first, in order to avoid having to fight on two fronts. That it was a flawed strategy is explained by P.J. Marshall. Political safety meant military preparedness. The military expenditure for 1761–62 to 1770–71 was 44% of the total spending of £22 million. War and diplomacy rather than trade and improvement. Most of the soldiers would be politicians, and governor-generals rarely understood. The political safety of Bengal was the first priority, and they interpreted safety as requiring the subjugation of Mysore, the Marathas, the Pindaris, the Nepalese and the Burmese. Border dispute. The acquisition of the Nawab of Awadh's lands by the British East India Company brought the region of Gorakhpur into the close proximity of the Raja of Palpa, the last remaining independent town within the Nepalese heartlands. Palpa and Butwal were originally two separate principalities. They were afterwards united under one independent Rajput prince who, having conquered Butwal, added it to his hereditary possessions of Palpa. The lands of Butwal, though conquered and annexed, were yet held in fief, or paid an annual sum, first to Awadh, and afterwards, by transfer, to the British. During the regency of Rani Rajendra Lakshmi, towards the close of the 18th century, the hill country of Palpa was conquered and annexed to Nepal. The Raja retreated to Butwal, but was subsequently induced, under false promises of redress, to visit Kathmandu, where he was put to death, and his territories in Butwal seized and occupied by the Nepalese. Bhimsen Thapa, the Nepalese Prime Minister from 1806 to 1837, installed his own father as governor of Palpa, leading to serious border disputes between the two powers. The illegal occupation from 1804 till 1812 to the Terai of Butwal by the Nepalese, which was under British protection, was the immediate reason which led to the Anglo-Nepal War in 1814. On October 1813, the ambitious Francis Edward Rawdon Hastings, the Earl of Moira, assumed the office of the Governor-General, and his first act was to re-examine the border dispute between Nepal and British East India Company. These disputes arose because there was no fixed boundary separating the Nepalese and the British. A struggle with the former was unpromising as the British were ignorant of the country or its resources and, despite the technological superiority, it was a received persuasion that the nature of the mountainous tract, which they would have to penetrate, would be as baffling to them as it had been to all the efforts of many successive Mohammedan sovereigns. A border commission imposed on Nepal by the Governor-General failed to solve the problem. The Nepalese commissioners had remarked to the British the futility of debating about a few square miles of territory, since there never could be real peace between the two states, until the British should yield to the Nepalese all the British provinces north of the Ganges, making the river the boundary between the two, as heaven had evidently designed it to be. Quote, in the meantime, the British found that the Nepalese were preparing for war, that they had for some time been laying up large stores of saltpeter, purchasing and fabricating arms, and organizing and disciplining the troops under some European deserters in this service, after the model of the companies of East India's sepoy battalions. The conviction that the Nepalese raids into the flatlands of the Terai, a much-prized strip of fertile ground separating the Nepalese hill country from India, increased tensions. The British felt the power in the region and the tenuous lines of communication between Calcutta and the northwest were under threat. Since there was no clear border, confrontation between the two powers was necessarily and unavoidable. Britain formally declared war with the Nepal on the 1st of November 1814. War preparation. Pre-war opinions. When the Kathmandu Durbar solicited Nepalese chiefs' opinions about a possible war with the British, Amar Singh Thapa was not alone in his opposition, declaring that they will not rest satisfied without establishing their own power and authority, and will unite with the hill Rajas, whom we have dispossessed. We have hitherto but hunted deer. If we engage in this war, we must prepare to fight tigers. Quote, he was against the measures adopted in Butwal and Shioraj, which he declared to have originated in the selfish views of persons who scrupled not to involve the nation in war to gratify the personal avarice. This contrasts sharply with the naivety of Prime Minister Bhimsen Thapa. Our hills and fastness are formed by the hand of God, and are impregnable. Quote, This stance by Bhimsen Thapa is not surprising, as insinuated by Amar Singh, considering Amar Singh had made the usurpations in Butwal and Shoreditch, and whose family derived most of the advantages. Prinsep estimates that the revenue of the usurped lands could not have been less than ₹1,00,000 a year to the Nepalese, in the manner they collected it. The retention of this income was therefore an object of no small importance to the ambitious views of Bhimsen Thapa and the preservation of the influence he had contrived to establish for his family. The Nepalese Prime Minister realized the Nepalese had several advantages over the British, including knowledge of the region and recent experience fighting in the mountainous terrain. However, the British had numerical superiority and far more modern weapons. In the meantime, the Governor-General also naively believed that the difficulties of mountain warfare were greater on the defensive side than on that of a well-conducted offensive operation. Soldiers like Rollo Gillespie saw the Nepalese as a challenge to British supremacy. Opinion is everything in such a country as India, and whenever the natives shall begin to lose the reverence for the English arms, our superiority in other respects will quickly sink into contempt. Finance. The Governor-General looked towards the Nawab of Awadh to finance the impending warfare with Nepal. 2 crore rupees were solicited. Of this matter he writes, Saadat Ali unexpectedly died. I found, however, that what had been provisionally agitated with him was perfectly understood by his successor, so that the latter came forward with a spontaneous offer of 1 crore of rupees, which I declined as a Pashkusha tribute on his accession to the sovereignty of Awadh, but accepted as a loan for the Honourable Company. 8 lakhs were afterwards added to this sum, in order that the interest of the whole, at 6%, might equal the allowances to different branches of the Nawab Vizier's family, for which guarantee of the British government had been pledged, and a payment of which without vexatious retardments was secured by the appropriation of the interest to the specific purpose. The sum thus obtained was thrown into the general treasury, whence I looked to draw such portions of it as the demands of the approaching service might require. My surprise is not to be expressed when I was shortly after informed from Calcutta that it had been deemed expedient to employ 54 lakhs of the sum obtained by me in discharging an 8% loan, that the remainder was indispensable for current purposes, and it was hoped I should be able to procure from the Nawab Vizier a further aid for the objects of the war. This took place early in autumn, and operations against Nepal could not commence till the middle of November, on which account the Council did not apprehend my being subjected to any sudden inconvenience through its disposal of the first sum. Luckily I was upon such frank terms with the Nawab Vizier as that I could explain to him fairly my circumstances. He agreed to furnish another crore, so that the Honourable Company was accommodated with above 2.5 millions sterling on my simple receipt. In the aftermath of the war, he writes, the richest portion of the territory conquered by us bordered on the dominions the Nawab Vizier. I arranged the transfer of that tract to him in extinction of the 2 crore which I had borrowed. Of that crore the charges of the war absorbed 52 lakhs. 48 lakhs were consequently left in the treasury, a clear gain to the Honourable Company, in addition to the benefit of precluding future annoyance from an insolent neighbour. This was in contrast with the Nepalese, who had spent huge amount of resources on the First and Second Wars against the Tibetans, which had not fared well for the Nepalese terrain to the British, who were used to fighting in the plains but were unacquainted with the terrain of the hills. The formidability of the topology is expressed by one anonymous British soldier as such, The territory subject to Nepal consists of a mountainous tract of country, lying between Tibet and the valley of the Ganges, in breadth not exceeding 100 miles, but in length stretching nearly along the whole extent of the northwest frontier of the British dominions. Below the hills they held possession of a portion of the plain of irregular width, distinguished by the name of the Nepal Tari, but the period at which the acquisition was made is not ascertained. The general military character of the country is that of extreme difficulty. Immediately at the front of the hills, the plain is covered with the Great Sal Forest. For an average width of 10 or 12 miles, the masses of the mountains are immense, the sides steep, and covered with impenetrable jungle. The trenches in these ridges are generally watercourses, and rather chasms or gulfs than anything that deserves the name of a valley. The roads are very insecure, and invariably pathways over mountains, or the beds of rivers, the usual means of transport throughout the country being by hill porters. Notwithstanding this general description, space is comparatively open and hollow, and elevated tracts of tolerably level land are to be met with, but so completely detached as to contribute but little to facilitate intercourse. One of the largest and most fertile of these constitutes the valley of Nepal proper. To the westward of Nepal, there is a difficult tract till the country again opens in the valley of Gurkha, the original possession of the present dynasty. Westward of this the country is again difficult, till it somewhat improves in the district of Kemayawan. Further to the westward lies the valley of the Doon, and the territory of Sunagur, and further still, the more recent conquests, stretching to the village in which Umar Singh, a chief of uncommon talents, commanded, and indeed exercised an authority almost independent